Have you ever found yourself thinking about why certain patterns keep repeating in your life, even when you believe you've already learned the lesson? It's as if, despite all your conscious efforts to change, you find yourself always returning to the same point, with the same frustrations, the same conflicts, the same mistakes, as if you were trapped within an invisible script written somewhere you can't access. Perhaps you left a toxic relationship only to, months later, find yourself involved with someone very similar. Or maybe you changed jobs believing you would finally find fulfillment, but the feeling of dissatisfaction returned over time like an inevitable fog dot. It's in this moment that we begin to perceive that something deeper is acting behind our choices. A kind of underground pattern that guides us even when we believe we're in control. Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and one of the pillars of depth psychology, said that what is not made conscious returns as fate. That is, everything we avoid looking at within ourselves, everything we bury or ignore, continues shaping our reality silently, until we can face it head-on. This repetition is not a punishment, but a call, an invitation from the psyche for us to look within and understand what still needs to be healed, understood, or integrated. But before we can transform these cycles, we need to recognize them. Often, we are so immersed in the automatism of daily life, in external demands and constant distractions, that we don't realize how much our choices are being determined by unconscious impulses. And it's precisely at this point that discovery begins, when we stop seeing our frustrations as coincidences or bad luck, and begin to question what there is in common between the events that repeat themselves. What is there in me that insists on creating this same type of bond? What unmet need leads me to accept less than I deserve? Why do I continue sabotaging my achievements when I start getting close to something significant? The answer is not outside. It's not in other people, nor in circumstances, it's inside. But accessing this deeper layer of the psyche requires courage, the courage to recognize that we are often strangers to ourselves. And it's in this unknown territory that we begin to find the clues of what imprisons us in painful cycles. Because deep down, everything that repeats in our life has an unconscious root. And it's only when we dive into this inner space that we truly begin to change the course of our story. It's in this dive that we find one of the most influential forces of our behavior, what Jung called the shadow. But before we understand how this rejected part of our personality silently shapes our decisions, we need to understand how it forms, and why we come to fear it so much. When we begin to perceive that certain painful patterns don't come from outside, but from within, we soon encounter something uncomfortable. Not everything that exists within us is conscious, beautiful, or accepted. There are parts of our personality that, for various reasons, we learn to hide, repress, or completely deny. It's these forgotten parts, frowned upon emotions, judged impulses, characteristics considered inadequate, that Jung called the shadow. And it's this shadow that, ignored, begins to operate silently behind our decisions. From very early on, we are taught about what is right or wrong to feel, think, and demonstrate. A child who expresses anger with intensity might be reprimanded, and learn, over time, that showing irritation makes them undesirable. Another who feels envy might be called selfish, and soon learns to suffocate this feeling whenever it arises. Thus, we keep pushing to the depths of the mind everything we believe we shouldn't be. But what we repress doesn't disappear, it just changes form. And it's precisely there that the shadow begins to manifest. It can appear as a tendency to be attracted to people who exhibit the traits you deny in yourself. It can emerge in emotional explosions that seem disproportionate, or in decisions you make almost as if it weren't you. When we deny parts of ourselves, we give them the power to act in the dark, creating situations that mirror what we insist on avoiding. It's as if life placed us before external versions of our internal conflicts, so that we can finally recognize them, That's why we often repeat the same mistakes and, worse, blame others for it. We accuse our partner of being controlling without realizing how much we also exercise control in subtle ways. We judge our work colleague for being competitive without noticing our own need to win at any cost. The shadow reveals itself in the mirrors that bother us most, and the more we avoid it, the more it dominates. But this doesn't mean the shadow is something negative or malignant. Quite the contrary. Jung shows us that it is an essential part of the totality of being. It guards potentials, repressed forces, suffocated talents, and truths we weren't able to accept. Integrating it is not being consumed by it, but learning to recognize it, dialogue with it, and bring it to consciousness. Only then do we stop being victims of unconscious patterns and begin to become agents of our own transformation. But even when we begin to perceive the shadow's influence, there is still something that operates with an almost autonomous force in our interior, something that often takes control of our reactions without us realizing it. And to understand why we continue acting against ourselves, even when we're already awakened to these mechanisms, we need to dive even deeper into the functioning of the unconscious complexes that live within us. As we deepen this inner dive, we begin to perceive that there is more than just rejected parts of our personality acting behind the scenes. There are internal forces that, in certain moments, seem to take complete control, as if something within us reacted automatically, without our rational consent. Banal situations of daily life can make us explode with anger, feel disproportionate sadness, or even paralyze us without a clear reason. When this happens, it's not just the shadow that's at play, but something even more structured within the psyche, the complexes. Carl Jung described complexes as autonomous emotional nuclei formed throughout our life, generally from traumatic or intense emotional experiences that we couldn't consciously integrate. They are like pockets of psychic energy that develop around sensitive themes: abandonment, rejection, humiliation, failure, and once formed, can function as small selves within us, with their own desires, emotions, and perceptions. And the most disturbing thing, they don't ask permission to act. They simply take the wheel. Think of a situation where someone said something apparently innocent, but you reacted with intensity, as if you had been deeply hurt. Probably who responded at that moment wasn't your rational self, but a wounded complex which carries old pains and interprets everything through the lens of the past. And while we don't recognize these internal structures, we continue living as marionettes of these automatic reactions. It's as if we were programmed to relive old pains, unconsciously seeking situations that activate these complexes so they can express themselves. The problem is that, in these moments, our consciousness weakens. We lose clarity. We give impulsive responses. We make decisions we regret later. And as a result, we perpetuate the same cycles that hurt us. We react with fear where we should act with courage. We attack when we should listen. We flee when life invites us to remain. These complexes, often created in childhood or in moments of great vulnerability, carry an emotional logic that hasn't been updated. They continue operating based on an old pain, even when circumstances have already changed. And it's precisely this lack of emotional updating that keeps us trapped in the past. We continue fighting old battles with current tools, confusing the present with unresolved wounds. And while we don't bring these complexes to the light of consciousness, they will continue taking control at key moments, sabotaging relationships, decisions, and opportunities. But recognizing that there is something within us that reacts so intensely is not a reason for guilt. It's the first step to transform. Because from the moment we perceive that we are not just victims of our behaviors, but also their creators, we begin to open space for a new way of seeing ourselves. However, even with this growing consciousness, there is still a powerful mechanism that perpetuates these patterns: the tendency to project our internal contents onto the external world. And while we don't understand this process, we will continue seeing outside what, in truth, is trying to call our attention from within. Even when we begin to recognize that there are old wounds shaping our reactions, we still often find ourselves blaming the world outside. We believe the problem lies in the people we encounter, in the situations we face, or in the bad luck that insists on knocking at our door. But what we frequently ignore is that there exists an extremely subtle and powerful psychological mechanism that continues feeding these repetitive patterns: projection. Projection is, essentially, the unconscious act of placing outside ourselves what we cannot accept within. All the qualities we deny, whether good or bad, end up being seen in the other. We project our insecurities, our repressed aggressiveness, our need for control, our fragility. And by doing this, we stop seeing people as they really are and begin to see them through the lens of what we don't want to admit in ourselves. That's why we often feel inexplicably attracted to certain people or deeply bothered by others. Without realizing it, they activate something within us, a reflection, a mirror. Someone who seems excessively arrogant to us might just be highlighting our own difficulty in assuming power. That person we judge as cold and distant might be showing us how much we fear demonstrating vulnerability. Or that partner who causes us so much emotional pain might be, in truth, the living incarnation of an old pattern we still haven't been able to heal. And the coolest thing about projection is that, while it remains unconscious, it imprisons us. We begin to live reactively, as if the world were constantly hostile, unfair, or frustrating. We create narratives where we are always victims of circumstances, without realizing that we are, all the time, placing in the external world conflicts that belong, in truth, to our internal world. We reenact old dramas, seek the same types of relationships, react to the same provocations, all because our psyche is trying, symbolically, to push us back toward what needs to be seen. It's not by chance that we attract certain types of people. They don't arrive by coincidence. They often carry the keys to accessing our deepest wounds. The other, in this process, becomes the stage where we enact what is still unresolved in us. And the most disconcerting thing is realizing that even our greatest enemies might be fulfilling the role of mirror, showing what we still refuse to integrate. But it's precisely there that a real possibility of transformation arises. When we stop accusing the other and begin to ask ourselves, what is this situation trying to show me about myself? We open the door to a new level of consciousness. We stop being merely reactive and begin to be observers of our own journey. It's at this point that the path opens to something deeper, the individuation process. An internal movement of integration and reconciliation with everything we have been fragmenting throughout life. Because only when we stop projecting what is missing can we finally begin to become who we really are. When we finally realize that much of what we see in the other is, in truth, a reflection of something that still needs to be embraced within us, a new type of consciousness begins to emerge. And it's at this exact point of the journey that Jung's depth psychology presents us with a path of reconciliation with ourselves. The individuation process. Individuation is not about becoming an idealized version of who we should be, but rather about becoming whole, integrating everything we have been rejecting, forgetting, or denying throughout life. It's a process that requires radical honesty, because it forces us to face aspects that, for a long time, we did everything to avoid. But it's also the only real path to definitively break the unconscious patterns that imprison us. It's not about a quick formula or a self-help manual. Individuation is a deep, personal, and continuous path. And although it is solitary in its essence, because no one can do this work for us, it also reconnects us with something greater than the ego. It invites us to look at the unconscious not as a dark enemy, but as an ally that guards everything we were forced to forget. Our fears, yes, but also our intuition, our creativity, our vital force. In this process, some practices become bridges. between the unconscious and consciousness. Dream analysis, for example, is a powerful tool. Jung believed that dreams are symbolic manifestations of the psyche, messages from the unconscious trying to guide us, correct imbalances, reveal hidden truths. By analyzing a dream seriously, we stop seeing strange images and begin to recognize aspects of ourselves disguised in metaphors. Each character, each environment, each event can carry a key dot. Another fundamental path is working with the shadow, that same aspect of us that we saw earlier as the great silent saboteur. When we choose to dialogue with it, recognize its intentions, and integrate it, we stop fighting against ourselves. We stop wasting energy trying to seem something we're not, and begin to cultivate a type of authenticity that no longer depends on external acceptance. We begin to live less to please and more to be. Furthermore, Jung also proposed dialogue with complexes as a way to alleviate their autonomy. When we create an internal space to listen to these voices that previously dominated us, we give them a chance to transform themselves. It's not about eliminating them, but about understanding what they want to tell us. A complex that previously reacted with anger can, when heard with empathy, reveal a deep pain that only needed recognition. The individuation process, therefore, is more than a therapeutic technique. It's a spiritual path in the most human sense of the word. It leads us back home, to the center of our being. But to follow this trail, commitment is necessary. Not to perfection, but to truth. Not to the image we show the world, but to what we are when the world goes silent. And when this path begins to be walked with sincerity, something within us begins, gradually, to reorganize itself. The patterns that previously seemed immutable begin to lose strength. The painful repetitions diminish. The automatic reactions transform into conscious choices. And it's precisely there, in that space between the old that dissolves and the new, that reveals itself, that true transformation begins to happen. As we advance on this path of inner integration, we begin to perceive that true change doesn't come from external promises or ready-made formulas, but from the courage to look at ourselves with depth, day after day. And throughout this process, something silent transforms. The patterns that previously seemed like curses of fate begin to be understood as messages from the psyche, and, with time, they stop repeating with the same force, precisely because now they are seen, felt, and embraced with consciousness. It's at this point that transformation stops being just a beautiful idea and begins to become a real internal movement. It's not about never making mistakes again or completely eliminating destructive impulses, but about stopping living on autopilot. About choosing. About being present enough to perceive, at the exact moment when an old pattern tries to manifest, that there exists another possibility, a new way of responding, that doesn't come from the old pain, but from a new place within us. This consciousness is gradually built. And it's through it that we stop being prisoners of the stories we lived and begin to be authors of our own plot. Jung didn't speak of fixing the human being, but of making them whole. This requires a continuous commitment to internal truth. The truth that isn't always pleasant, but that liberates us. Because only by recognizing our deepest contradictions can we, in fact, choose something different. By becoming conscious of our complexes, our shadow, our projections, and unconscious repetitions, we begin to remove the power these mechanisms had over us. Not because they disappear, but because now they no longer need to scream to be heard. We begin to give space for all our parts to exist, even the most difficult ones, and by doing this, something begins to reorganize internally. This work, of course, doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, sometimes painful, often confusing. But it is, without doubt, profoundly liberating. And as we advance, we perceive that the suffering that previously imprisoned us begins to transform into learning. Pain converts into wisdom. What previously paralyzed us now propels us. Becoming conscious is not a final destination, but a continuous process of approaching oneself. And the more we know ourselves, the more we free ourselves from the need to repeat the past. Because it's no longer the unconscious that commands, it's us, with all the complexity that this involves. This is the essence of Jungian work, not creating an ideal self, but becoming who we truly are, with everything that this means. And perhaps the greatest sign that we're on the right path is realizing that the situations that previously made us bleed begin to teach us. That the mirrors that previously hurt us now reveal to us. And that what seemed like an inevitable fate was in truth just a request from the soul to be looked at with more love. It's in this moment that cycles break. Not because the world changed, but because we changed. And with this, everything around us begins, inevitably, to change as well. If this video helped you see with more clarity the patterns that repeat in your life and inspired you to look with more depth within yourself, don't forget to leave your like. This helps the content reach more people who are also on this journey. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe now and follow more reflections like this about self-knowledge, psychology, and inner transformation. Your presence here makes all the difference. Until next time.